Hello there, I'm Alex, and I sell cheese for a living. As a cheesemonger and certified cheese professional, I have helped thousands of customers find their favorite cheese. Welcome back to The Modern Monger. In the last episode, we talked about how to shop for cheese and how to chat cheese with your local cheesemonger. This week, we go over what to do with the cheese once you get it home, how to keep the cheese alive in your fridge, how to prepare it to be eaten, and the tools needed to work with cheese and serve it. We will also go over some of the basics of cheese and charcuterie board building. Because whether you're building a snack plate for 2, a board for 20, or a grazing table for a full evening of entertaining, this episode will help you become more comfortable with preparing and serving cheese. So, you've left the counter with your purchase, and you managed to get it all the way home, and you stuff it in your fridge. Well, what now? Here are some good tips for keeping your new cheese buddy alive and thriving in your fridge. Here are some best storage options. The ideal option would be cheese paper. Perforated, 2-layered, it's designed for humidity exchange. It keeps the cheese breathing. Parchment or wax paper, and a loosely wrapped plastic or reusable bag. Something to avoid would be fully sealed plastic wrap. This turns your cheese into ammonia-flavored garbage. Nobody wants to eat that. Where exactly in your fridge should you keep your cheese? I would say the vegetable drawer. It's stable and humid. Cheese likes consistency, and you will find that there versus right next to the leftover meatloaf from 3 days ago. Your cheeses should always come with an expiration date or a best by date. These can be divisive depending on who you talk to, but here's a quick breakdown of those two phrases. Best by or best before, this usually means that the date given is going to be the peak freshness or ripeness of that product. Eating cheese past this date doesn't necessarily mean you'll have a bad time, but the cheese could be a little more muted or less flavorful, and not exactly what the cheesemaker had in mind when they made that cheese. They were expecting the product to be eaten at peak freshness and to be enjoyed as planned. An expiration or use-by date would be more based on a signs of bacterial growth. Any food eaten past this date would technically be past its prime, and the food may already be well on its way to spoilage or to become unsafe to eat, even if it doesn't show signs yet. This type of dating is considered unsafe to eat past the given date. But here are a few rough time frames for cheeses to live to a full and flavorful life in your fridge once you open the package. Now, cheese lifespan mostly depends on moisture, as more moisture means a shorter life. But here's a quick breakdown. Fresh cheeses like ricotta or chèvre maybe get 7 to 10 days. A soft ripened cheese like brie or camembert, 1 to 2 weeks. A semi-soft like fontina or havarti, maybe 2 to 4 weeks. Semi-firm like gruyere or manchego, maybe 4 to 6 weeks. Hard or aged like a parmigiano reggiano or a pecorino romano, I'd give it maybe a couple months. Just, check it. And blue cheeses, maybe 2 to 4 weeks. Again, these are all just rough estimates that I found work pretty accurately. But again, before you eat anything, check it, make sure it's fine. And if you are checking in on the cheese and wondering if it's still good around the best by or the use by date, look for these signs. If it is slimy or sweaty in texture, if there is a pink, black, or like a neon mold, kind of like if it looks like graffiti, don't eat that. Ammonia smell, that kind of stings when you lean into it. Some cheeses naturally will have a little bit of an aroma of ammonia, but a sharp, like abrasive hit to your nose, that's never good. And then sharp, sour, or rancid notes that don't usually belong to that cheese. If you've had this cheese a couple times and you know what it normally smells like, and one random Thursday it suddenly smells way different, that's not a good sign. Maybe it's time to let go. Now, if there's white or blue mold on a harder cheese, you can probably cut off maybe an inch around the mold, and then you're fine. Okay, here, those were, again, just some rough guidelines, but you've kept your cheese safe and sound long enough. It's time to eat. Like, how do you eat it? What do you do? How do you prepare it exactly? I've seen some people, myself included, you pull it out of the fridge, shove it straight into your face. And sometimes that's all you need. You just need a little quick boost of, hey, I need cheese. Eat it, you're done. But I would recommend, though, if you have the time, let it sit out for 30 to 60 minutes so that it can warm up and let it wake up from the cold of the fridge. And as far as how you want to eat it, that depends on how much time you have and how many dishes you want to do. If we can go back a second to the perfect bite concept from an earlier episode, this is when we were in the store and we were planning on how we would eat the cheese we're looking at. Was it just a cheese you really liked, you threw it in the basket, get it home, we'll figure that out later? Or is it something we planned an entire bite around while we were still shopping? Did we get all the ingredients we needed? Okay, gather up all the ingredients, and then we can start building the perfect bite or bites. Myself, I usually prefer a handful at once and then go to town on that little plate I've created. But for this experiment, let's just say you picked a nice blue cheese, a pear, and some dark chocolate. Maybe layer a thick slice of pear, a piece of broken chocolate on top, and then smear or crumble the blue cheese on top of the chocolate. To me, this is a perfect little snack or appetizer before a larger meal. And remember to give your cheese time to breathe before eating, because a wedge of cheese straight from the fridge is like trying to enjoy fine wine cold out of the bottle. It's technically drinkable, but it's not showing its best self. Let your cheese show you its best self. Okay, let's go one step further. We are going to prepare more than one cheese for a group of people. Maybe your family, maybe a few good friends. This is not just you standing in your kitchen. This is you are planning a small event. And maybe it's not even an event, but you want to have cheese available to be eaten for whatever this is. And for this event, we want to offer a variety of cheeses and pairings, maybe some charcuterie meats and fruits. And this is also a good time to bring out a nice charcuterie board, and we can start building. If you liked the perfect bite idea, you could make up a few dozen bites with different cheeses and pairings and arrange them on a platter or board. But this will take some considerable time, and it's possible your perfect palate doesn't vibe well with some of the other people eating your creations. Not every perfect bite is perfect for everyone. If you want to keep the theme of your perfect pairing, just deconstruct it. Arrange all the ingredients in little piles on a board and let your guests know that this specific corner of the board, if all eaten together, is truly amazing. Now, this gives them the option to build the bite themselves, leave something off. Let's say they're allergic to something or they really, really hate blue cheese. This also gives them the opportunity to add something else to it you may not have thought of. Let's say they wanted to add some really spicy honey on top of the pear and chocolate. Perfect. Let them do it. That'll be delicious. Before we get too crazy in the actual building of the board, let's take a second to go over some of the tools you may want for preparing a board or for entertaining in general. Some different blades, some different knives, some specialty cheese tools. You could do a wire cutter. This is really good for blue and soft cheeses. It can be handheld, kind of like a harp, or it can be a larger box with a wire pulley system. Both are great. Just depends on what you have space for, what you feel like cleaning. An offset knife for firmer cheeses. You can do as a cheese plane or curler. This is good for like Goudas, Manchegos. It's a great tool for creating thin shavings. A little side note, the thickness and amount of cheese you put onto a board or into your mouth changes kind of how it tastes. A very thin shaving of a cheese versus like a 1-inch by 1-inch chunk of cheese, it will taste different. You also are going to want some spreaders and forks for your softs and blues, tiny little cute forks. Some little skeleton knives have a fork on the end for such uses. But at the end of the day, you can use whatever you have on hand. If you just have some butter knives and a couple spoons, that works too. As you grow in your cheese journey, you may choose to pick up some of the more popular tools to look aesthetically correct. But if you can break apart the cheeses and serve it with a plastic fork and that makes you happy, go for it. It's your kitchen, it's your cheese board. Another tip, don't pre-slice or cut or crumble more than you need. If you have enough need for a good chunk of cheese, like a good sized chunk, you can place the wedge directly on the board, slice off just a few pieces and leave them and lean them next to that wedge, or crumble some of it off and place it next to the wedge as well. Leave a small knife or spoon next to the cheese so your guests know that they are encouraged to get as much or as little as they would like. And make sure each cheese, if this is your path, gets their own knife or spoon. You don't want the blue knife going in your brie knife, going in your manchego. It's just each cheese should get its own item, its own utensil. Okay, so we have some of the more handheld tools. What do you put the cheese on for presenting? Serving cheeses on the proper surface kind of elevates everything. It just depends on what you're going for. Here's some solid choices. Wooden boards. It's classic, it's warm, It's kind of forgiving on knives if you choose to cut straight into it. And these come in all sorts of crazy shapes, and chances are you have something like this in your home already. Somebody gave you a gift 5 years ago that you threw in a closet, or even a cleaned up cutting board can work. Anything flat and large enough to hold what you need it to hold. But you might have a marble or a slate board. These are great for creamier cheeses as they won't soak into the woods as easy. These are a lot easier to clean, and they're visually striking. A nice marble slab with a couple colorful cheeses on top just looks nice. You can also do some ceramic or like a porcelain platter. It's great for smaller get-togethers, or if you're pairing a lot of fruits and dips. That way every dip has its own little ramekin. If you're planning a grazing table, you might want to think of some kind of large parchment paper. And this, laid out over a countertop or a table, will create a clean surface for the foods to rest on. So you're not just putting, a wedge of tome on top of your counter where your kids spilled cereal that morning. And so for some creative options, if you're planning a themed board or event, think of a fun way to display the cheese while still keeping things clean and safe. Maybe a mirror with the reflection facing upwards. You could do some larger banana leaves. And then every holiday, you can find all sorts of fun-shaped serving trays. These would all work. Every holiday gets a cool tray. Who wouldn't want to eat pumpkin spice cheese out of a platter shaped like a jack-o'-lantern? It just goes hand in hand. Some additional tools you might want to have on hand: small plates and napkins, toothpicks, serving tongs, ramekins for, spreads, dips, olives, or anything else that might be a little more fluid, and you kind of want the juices to keep to themselves. You don't want it spreading to other sections of the board. You want to contain it. Little flags that you can stick around the board that state what each cheese or accompaniment is. That way there's no confusion when there's 3 cheeses that all look white. If you label what they are and stick it next to it, your guests will know what they're eating. Yeah, this is also a good time if there's a raw milk or a nut allergen present, make that labeled and very obvious so that if anybody does have an issue, they can stay away from whatever they can't eat. If you like, you can even provide a full breakdown of everything that was on the board. This can be a cute chalkboard sign, or it can be a printed, laminated handout. You could even frame something, put it next to the board. Something, if you just wanted to break down every item, if you wanted to include branding or country of origin, that way it kind of shows where everything came from to make its way onto your board. Something else I would highly recommend is getting an appropriate waste basket for discarded plates and toothpicks. Or if somebody really doesn't like the taleggio you selected, it would give them an easy out than just leaving it on their plate, stinking up the rest of their food. Now, I'm not sure if just reading all of this is going to make a lot of sense, but it might spark some ideas. Here are some popular pairings to try out on your board. Let's say you picked out a few cheeses and you don't know what goes with it. This may help you get started on what else you can use or buy to fill out your board. All right, brie. Maybe try a honey or like a mango chutney on top of it. I like any kind of fruit pairing with brie. It's going to work for me. Cheddar usually gets apples. You could also try something coffee flavored like a crunchy espresso bean. That would go well with it. Manchego wants quince paste. You could also do like a salted caramel on top of that. Parmigiano Reggiano, think like a balsamic. I like green olives with it. You could also do dark chocolate. Fresh goat cheese, I think like... Again, fresh fruits, maybe a watermelon, maybe like on top of a beet salad if you're making a whole entree out of it. Blue cheese, I've said this before, pears and chocolate, that's my go-to. Gruyere, some kind of pork, if you're going to do like a prosciutto or a salami, and then you could even do a fruit on top of that. Havarti, think like pickles, mustard, jalapeno jelly, something with a little more kick since Havarti is going to be a little creamier. Same thing with brie, except you might want to go a little funkier flavors, like maybe something with like sriracha or like a hot jelly. Also some kind of bubbly wine works really well with that. And then aged Gouda, dried figs, chocolate. I like prosciutto with my aged Gouda. And let's say you've picked out a handful of cheeses and accompaniments and you got, I don't know, a whole basket, and you're trying to figure out how much you need to buy for people, because not everybody's going to eat the same amount, and not everybody's going to eat everything on the board. So it's kind of a guessing game. But here are some numbers that will more or less guide you there. Again, these are all rough averages. It really depends on who you're serving. Teenagers versus, 80-year-olds, they're going to eat differently. People who are really into cheese versus beginners, they're going to eat differently. And then if this is a meal or if it's an appetizer or if it's part of like a grazing experience, these are all things you want to calculate into how much you buy. So this is what I would say. If it's cheeses, look at about 2 ounces a person. If it's just a snack, if it's like an appetizer. And I would think that goes for every cheese. So if you're going to get, 3 or 4 cheeses, get up to 2, maybe 3 ounces per person total. So maybe an ounce per cheese. If it's a meal, like this is the main course or the main entree of an evening, maybe closer to 4 or 5 ounces of cheese per person. Charcuterie, half that. Usually for me. So if you're going to do 2 to 3 ounces of cheese per person, maybe do 1 to 1.5 ounces of charcuterie. And that's total. So if you're going to have 3 salamis, maybe, half an ounce of each item per person. Breads and crackers, I like to keep that on par with the cheese because they're usually fairly light and it goes well with hopefully everything else you have on the board. So about 2 ounces of cheese, maybe do 2 ounces of crackers. And you can go a different route. You can say, I have 15 people coming over and I have 3 types of crackers. I want each person to have 4 pieces of each cracker so they can sample everything appropriately. I'm not going to take the time to do the math on that, but you get the point. Fruits, nuts, extras. Again, kind of go with your gut, but I feel like it would be similar to charcuterie. Maybe half as much of each of those items that you're doing with cheese. So I'm going to go back to, let's say each person gets 2 ounces of cheese. Maybe you maybe you build in an ounce of nuts and an ounce of a dried fruit and an ounce of a jelly or an ounce of a chocolate, an ounce of each of those items per person. Some real rough numbers. Shopping examples would be if you're going to have 10 people total, maybe 2.5 to 3 pounds of cheese, 1 to 1.5 pounds of meat, and then around 2 pounds total of all the extra stuff. 20 people, double all that, 5 to 6 pounds of cheese, maybe 3 pounds of meat, 4-ish pounds of all the extra. So if you're going to have 10 people coming over, you want 3 different cheeses, get a pound of each. You'll be set. You'll probably have a little extra, but who doesn't hate extra leftover cheese? And if you're building an event for a large gathering, let's say 25 people, double or triple the amounts and add way more variety. So if, I said you needed, cut all that. For 10 people, an amount of each thing. So let's say cheeses, maybe do 4 to 6 cheeses, different cheeses. Meats, 2 to 3 different meats, and then however many accompaniments you want, 4 to 7, depends. Some people really like different chocolates. Some people like fresh grape with a dried cranberry. It just depends on what you're building. But however many cheeses of different varieties, maybe cut that in half again for your meats. So let's say you do 6 cheeses, do 3 meats. And this is building a cheese and charcuterie board. If you want to build just a charcuterie board where cheese is not the main option, you can do that. I don't recommend it because this is a cheese show. All right, cutting and serving the cheeses. How you cut the cheeses can really change the experience of the board. It can elevate it in some ways. If you have a bunch of cheeses that are all soft and can be sliced, and you cut all of them into cubes, your board is going to look very nice and neat and a little boring. I like each cheese to have a different shape and appearance when I'm building it. If you can do wedges, if you can do triangle slices, long matchsticks, if you can do, cubes, pyramids, rectangles, octagons, whatever you can cut, whatever you can manage, make it different. Each cheese should have its own shape or style. And if you can't cut it, crumble it. Some, blue cheeses or aged cheeses, as you hold it, it naturally wants to break apart. Let your hands break it apart. That gives it a nice rustic look, and I think adds a lot more depth to the board. It definitely adds texture. And there is a place for cubed cheese on a board. I just don't think every single cheese should be cubed. Again, for accompaniments, here's some popular ones. Although think, what do you like to eat? And then as you get to know your guests, let's say it's the same 10 people every week and you guys kind of swap who makes the board that week. Here are some popular ones. Fruits, you can do grapes, figs, pears, apples, nuts, almonds, walnuts, pecans, Breads and crackers, you can do like a baguette slice, or I like to just chunk up a loaf of like sourdough. That's really nice. Seeded crackers, crispy rounds, anything visually different. If you get every this goes back to the cheese thing. If every cracker you get is just a round circle, that's going to look a little dull. Mix it up. Maybe chunk up some bread or get some long rectangular crackers. Get, if it's Christmas, get a Christmas tree cracker, throw it on the board. It'll look nice. Some popular condiments, honey, jams, mustard, pickled vegetables, these all have a place. And when it comes to drinks, I would go with your gut on this one, or maybe go to your local like wine shop, or if you know a sommelier, or even if you just are real good with Google, some guidelines for how you could pair drinks with your board. I would think a wine, like a white wine with fresh cheeses, reds with an aged or a bolder cheese. So like if it's fairly young and a little softer, maybe a little whiter, those cheeses probably would be nicer with like a white wine. An older cheese, a more stronger flavored cheese, those might be better paired with reds. Beer, kind of similar. Lighter beers with a milder cheese, darker ales or stouts with a stronger cheese. And then non-alcoholic, sparkling water, cider, grape juice, all of those are nice palate cleansers in between trying cheeses. And one thing I learned a long time ago was if you don't know what pairs well with a cheese, try a sparkling white wine. It will probably taste great. Some specific drink pairings that I think work well. If you're looking for, I want to pair a wine with one cheese, not just I want to have one or two drinks available next to a board. A blue, think a port or a sweeter wine. Aged Gouda, maybe something like a bourbon. Brie and Camembert love champagne. I love champagne. Manchego, maybe a nice medium red. A Tempranillo would be really cool because that would be regionally appropriate. Something we can get into later for like regional pairings, but that's a perfect pairing, Manchego. And then cheddar and like a craft ale, any kind of beer. Now, something else to talk about would be the different types of boards and some themes that might help you kind of get to where you're needing to go, depending on who you're serving and when you're serving. If it's a nice holiday, you could do a super fun holiday themed board versus if it's a, Tour de France and you want to have a nice French board. But before that, let's go over the difference between a cheese board, a charcuterie board, and a crudité platter, because these are all very different and not everyone quite gets that. A cheese board, this is going to be all about the cheeses. Minor accompaniments for balance. You might get a couple meats on there, but the star of these boards is the cheese. These are my favorites. Charcuterie board, the meats are going to take on a larger role on this board. Cheese is going to be complementing the meats. But the hero of the charcuterie board is, surprising, the charcuterie, which charcuterie means, burnt or charred flesh. Charcuterie, cooked flesh is, I think, a more appropriate version, but it's meat. And the word picked up popularity sometime in the 1950s, and it's just gone up and up and up since, but it is meat, You can't have a crudité platter of vegetables and call it charcuterie if there's no meat on it. Same thing with a cheese board. You can't have an all cheese board with no meat and then call it charcuterie board. Granted, you can do anything you want, but if I go to your party and you tell me there's a charcuterie board and it's hummus tray, I'm going to look at you a little goofy. Not that you should care what I think of you, but, weird. So there you go. Charcuterie board needs charcuterie as its star. And a crudité platter, it's going to be mostly fresh vegetables. Some cheese and meats, they're optional. Given that they're optional, most people probably won't do it. They might do a couple cubed up cheeses if they're trying to be cute, but that is a vegetable platter. All right, back to the themes and the different types of boards. Again, cheese only. The focus is purely on cheese. A mixture of textures and milk types. Maybe you'd have some different regions that you want to incorporate. An example would be like, to make it varied, you could do a brie, a cheddar, and a blue. 3 very different cheeses, but you put them on a board, you add some accompaniments, and it gives people a nice variety of cheeses to try. This type of board you would garnish lightly with nuts, some dried fruits, or herbs for color. A cheese and charcuterie board. You're going to add meats to this. You're going to get some prosciutto, some salami, some chorizo, add that onto the cheese board. A good tip, fold or roll your meats instead of just laying them flat. It's more visually interesting. Plus, it'd be easier for most people to pick it up. If you just have a row of salami and somebody wants one, they're going to have to probably touch a few other pieces before getting the one they want. Whereas if you fold it and kind of make a tower out of it and they can just pick up one individual piece, it's a lot easier. It looks more interesting too. Back to the crudité. It's going to be mostly fresh vegetables, dips, maybe a cheese or two. And these are good for like a health conscious event, or if you're wanting to add one of these next to a cheese board, that's a great option as well. Breakfast or brunch boards, think, maybe the day after a wedding or day after Christmas, and you don't really want a heavy meal, but you want something. A breakfast board is perfect. You're going to want like some soft cheeses, fruits, pastries, think, light spreads, like a lot of jellies, honeys, and like a croissant would go very well here. Dessert boards, sweet cheeses, think, your triple creams for the richness, some mascarpone or blue cheeses with some toppings. You can add your chocolate, your nuts, your honeys, your fruits, and this can also double as a dessert course. Maybe you make this board, if you have 20 people, let's say you make it for 10. Not everybody's going to eat as much because it is the end of a meal. There are some really fun cheeses out there. There's some chocolate cheeses. You got a lot of cheeses with fruits in them, cheeses with honey mixed in, all of those paired with like some chocolate, some candied items that could be for a really fun board. And then the cultural regional boards, these are really cool. It's where everything on the board has a connection. Everything there builds around a theme. So like French themed, you could be brie, comté, roquefort, and then like a French baguette and some grapes. It's very French, There's some other things you get onto that, but that's the core. Spanish themed board, you could look at like manchego, some Iberico ham, some membrillo, and then Marcona almonds. Again, all very Spanish, very delicious. You could even do a local farmstead board. You could showcase a local cheese in your area and then tie in some meats from if there's a local butcher or if there's someone who makes, artisan meats in your area. Find someone who sells honey local to your state. I personally really enjoy holiday boards. I mean, you look at Thanksgiving, you have anything cranberry, pumpkin spice, some fresher cheeses, think like goat cheese, and then maybe even a washed rind for something like a little more meaty. Make your board look like a Thanksgiving dinner. At Christmas, bries are very popular with the fruit on the bries. You can do some aged Goudas. I think a lot of fruity, warm and cozy. Put some apple jam on a baguette. Top it with some shaved red Leicester. Like, it all works. If you just have an idea on the colors or if you want to have the flavors mix and match, you can have a lot of fun with a holiday board. New Year's, think champagne. Everything and anything that pairs well with champagne should be on this board. Fresh fruits, chocolates, more brie, maybe some Gruyere and Comté, and champagne. Yeah, that's going to be the hero of that party. So make sure everything you have on that board will pair well with champagne or a sparkling juice, whatever. It's helpful to know your theme first because it influences how much space each element takes, what knives or utensils you need to have provided, and how you arrange the board visually. Something else to keep in mind when building boards is sensitivities and allergens. Modern hosting isn't just about the aesthetic of what you've built. Some of your guests might have an allergy or a dietary restriction, and you need to let them know what you've provided for them may or may not contain what they may or may not can eat. Nut allergies, avoid nuts on the board. Try to keep them separated or in its own little ramekin. There will be some cross-contamination, but as long as your guests know there are nuts there, they can make up their own choices on what to eat. Gluten, if you know someone that has a gluten allergy, offer some gluten-free crackers or bread on the side of the board so that they have something to feel included. Dairy intolerance, this is tricky, but every year there's more and more lactose-free cheeses or plant-based alternatives. If you know there's a few people coming that can't have dairy, maybe include one or two of those options for them, and who knows? You might try it and you might love it yourself. Some of them are really delicious. And then vegetarian and vegan friends, consider a plant-based meat, a spread, or a cheese. Again, they may not want it directly on the platter, so maybe have a little side platter for them, but keep it next to the board so that they don't feel like they have to go to a completely different room just to get a snack, whereas everyone else can just all gather around the counter together. Labeling, I've said it before, is your friend. Little cards or handwritten notes can provide an awkward conversation mid-party. Okay, so we have our cheeses purchased. We have our accompaniments selected. We have the board we're going to use. We have all the tools we need. We have a theme in mind. Let's build the board. I like to do cheeses first. Place them around the board so that they aren't touching. And if you're going to have them all individually sliced or crumbled, if you're going to have the wedges with the little knife on top or the spreadable knife, that's fine too. But I like to do cheeses first, and everyone has a different way of doing this. This is just what's worked for me. After the cheeses, I do my accompaniments, not meats. I do meats last. If I'm going to do a ramekin of olives or a jelly spread in a little cup, or if I'm going to do a thing of honey, whatever, place those around the board as well, trying to not buddy up like items. I don't ever want the same thing to touch. So like if I have 2 different kinds of fruits, I'm going to put the fruits on opposite ends of the boards. If I have 3 different crackers, I'm going to have the crackers spaced out so that they aren't touching each other. If I'm going to have 2 or 3 different kinds of nuts, same thing. I don't want any of the like items to touch. I think visually it makes it more interesting. And if you're building your board with perfect pairings in mind, you could almost break it into a quadrant. So like the northeast section of the board, that's one pairing. You get your 3 to 5 ingredients, you arrange them in a beautiful way, and then that section of the board, everything over there pairs well with each other. Same thing with, let's say the southwest quadrant, that could be another perfect pairing that you've created, and everything over there will work well together. This is just something you can play with. It doesn't have to be that way. You can have 4 or 5 different perfect bites in mind with the ingredients you have, and then just arrange all of them together on the board and tell your guests to figure it out. You have done the legwork. Now it's time for them to do a little bit of the trial and error of what they think works well. Okay, so we have the cheeses, we have the accompaniments. I do the meats last because usually they don't take up as much space. I'm going to fold the meats. I might make a salami rose, do some prosciutto ribbons. All of these are very fun pops of color, usually like a red color. And again, they don't take up a ton of room. So if you have any gaps between like a cracker row and a pile of nuts, fill a little salami river in there. You got a big hole between your fruit jelly and your brie. There's a salami rose. I don't plan out the meats as much because I just look for where there's spaces left. That's where the meat's going to go. Once you've built your board, take a step back, look at it. Does it work for you? If it does, great. Admire your work. Take a picture. Turn it around a couple times. Maybe there's a better angle that you want to present it with. Let's say you're looking at it and you really don't like a few of the things you did. Nothing's glued down. Take it off. Redo it. If you have an extra, half a jar of pickles and you really need some more color, on the right-hand side, add more pickles. It doesn't matter. It's your board. You need it to look nice for you. Now that you know how to build a good board, you could build a grazing table. The concept as it is the same. You're going to want probably larger variety of items, and you're going to want a lot more of each item. But the building is, for me, about the same. However much space you have, if you have 5 cheeses or 10 cheeses, put those out. You're probably going to have a lot larger quantities. This may be your giant wedge of cheese or even a whole round of brie, and then fill it in with all the accompaniments. Here, though, you can go a little crazier. You might have a basket of crackers, or you could have an entire jar of jelly, or you could have more accessories to the grazing table that may not always fit on a small board. You can have risers with crackers falling down to make it look like a waterfall. You can have a parallel salami river that goes across the entire table. You can really play with what you're able to do because you should have a lot more space. And, this might be a nice time to add like a floral centerpiece. Maybe you have a nice bouquet of flowers. You can put that off to the side. If you have some more, like an intricate cheese that you're trying to show off, like a tête de moine, and you have the little cheese curler that goes with it, then you can have that entire setup somewhere on the table, and people can just go curl the top of the cheese off, make little flowers, and then eat it. And you don't have to have the flowers all ready to go. It can be an interactive experience with the grazing table. Just to recap, Here's some things we went over today. Cheese storage. You should use some nice cheese paper and a crisper drawer. We've talked about how to serve cheese in your home, how to bring it to room temperature, certain cutting techniques, and proper presentation. We talked a little bit about the knives and utensils, boards, bowls used for building charcuterie board events. We talked about building charcuterie boards, calculating quantities, themes, pairing accompaniments, make sure to label for allergies. We've learned not only how to keep cheese alive, but how to present it beautifully, thoughtfully, and in a way that lets everyone enjoy it safely. And that's our story for today. You now have the tools to make cheese the center of connection and celebration. Thank you for listening. I'm Alex, and this has been episode 3 of The Modern Monger.